Dan,
Yes,
I've
Anna.
never been more scared in my entire life.
But
And I've never felt more alive.
Anna, are you so war-torn that you can't try on a dress?
Dan, I want you to deliver that a little more like she did.
Oh, okay. All right, hold on. Seriously?
Which was
Okay,
kind
hold on.
of lightness, right? Like
Yeah,
it was
okay,
kind
okay.
of like
I was
I
moving to
can
your
redo
turn.
mine too if you think.
No, I'll do it. I'll do it. Hold on. Let me try it again.
Okay.
Anna, are you so war-torn you can't try on a dress?
See, that's better.
There we go. There we go.
Welcome to Space the Nation, where we look at science fiction through the lens of
Master Civil War cleavages.
and cultural mystification. Today we'll be talking about Alex Garland's Civil War, which is playing in movie theaters right now. And in the next few weeks, we'll be talking about basically nothing but Planet of the Apes. Is that right, Dan?
The next 3 weeks. Next 3 weeks we're doing
April.
April. Yeah. April. Oh my God! How did we not think of this? Wow, we totally should have done that. We could have, yeah, although it would have meant we couldn't have recorded this episode. But
and
yes,
it's a little too late. We're only really going to be doing 2 of them in April.
yes. So the latter half of April, we are going to be doing the original Planet of the Apes with Charlton Heston, and then we will do War for the Planet of the Apes, which is the most recent one, to lead us up to Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes.
And we have lots of ideas, but we're always taking suggestions. The best way, the absolute best way to give a suggestion that we will probably actually take notice of is to become a patron.
Yeah, like a really big patron. We respond to money. No, I'm just kidding. Just become a patron. That's not necessarily
a
true.
Smaller patron also.
We do respect.
For as little as $3 a month, they can join the Discord, which is
the primary way by which we take our patrons' ideas. And you also, in return for just that small amount, get early access to podcasts, get access to our monthly AUAs, which we need to schedule, and also, beyond access to our wonderful Discord channel, also don't have to listen to advertisements.
That's right. The biggest critique of capitalism in everything we do is the fact that some people have to listen to ads. So we are now closer than we ever been to accepting ads. Oh, that's your line.
Sorry, Karen.
Where do you want to pick up?
We don't have to do that if you don't want to. It's okay.
That is a good line.
I thought you would appreciate it.
All right.
I do this for you, Anna.
Yeah. So
you gotta leave me in if I'm
you can
say
leave
that.
All that in. So Dan, why are we talking about this movie?
Well, for one thing, I think we all noticed when the first trailer for this film came out, given what was, happening in the zeitgeist in early 2024, and this film, does not.
Still happening. One could argue.
Happening, but makes it clear that this is about journalists covering a civil war in the United States. Indeed, the trailer got people talking so much that I believe my favorite, there was a Ringer article devoted entirely to whether what was in the trailer was plausible. So, like, clearly it got people motivated. And then watching the film, it turns out this is about journalism, and it's about war, and it stars your doppelganger, Kirsten Dunst. So, like, all of our bases are covered, basically.
She also lives in Austin, her and Jesse.
I did not know that. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
This premiered at South by Southwest, right? I mean, I think that's correct.
Yes, it did. And it got really good buzz out of it. I want to talk about some of the reviews that came out.
Okay. Looking forward to that.
But it definitely caught everyone's attention for all the reasons that you're saying. I think it is interesting. I guess I can't avoid talking about some of the reviews right up the top, which is that I've talked to some people who have told me they're now hesitant to see it, having seen reviews that say that it is a pox on both their houses movie. And I've told those people that I do not think it is that.
We will get into this a little bit later in the podcast. I will say this. I think Garland is trying to walk a very fine line, and I think it does work, but I understand that there's some stuff that's done that I think is intentionally designed to obfuscate what, the politics of the film are, and we will get to that in a little bit.
Yeah, okay. I would say
Yeah.
there's some intentional obfuscation, but that
Yeah.
ultimately there's
Sure, but like, there's let me put it this way: we've talked about this prior. We've talked about this film a lot, listeners, before recording this. Your interpretation of some things is somewhat at odds with my interpretation of some things.
Hmm.
Not entirely, but like, because I think in the main I agree with you on some stuff, but I think there's other stuff that is designed to be intentionally ambiguous, not in a pox on both houses kind of way, more in a this is what war does kind of way.
Oh, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
I we shall talk more about it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
will this podcast ruin it for people as much as we're going to talk about it, Dan?
Fucking A, it's going to ruin it for you. Go watch the goddamn film. I mean,
I'm not
yeah.
sure. Here, how about this answer? I'm not sure if it can be ruined, actually.
Oh,
I think
okay,
it's
so
that
like
good.
this. Let me put it this way: you should watch the film. Like I
You
think
should watch
we
the
both
film
recommend it.
for
Yes,
sure,
yes,
in case we say something that might spoil it for you. And there are plot points that you would rather not see coming. But
right.
I have told Dan, and it is true, I plan on seeing this movie again,
Yeah,
like in the theaters.
I will say this: a
So
lot of the plot points are very, very predictable and telegraphed massively. Like it in some ways, one of the interesting things is the way in which Garland is taking a very hoary plot in some ways, but like injecting some interesting vitality into it. And that was fascinating to me.
yeah,
All right, let's get to the story behind the story. Anna, I hear that Alex Garland came up with the idea for this prior to the January the 6th insurrection. Is that actually true?
it is. Although he's also said that the insurrection definitely, like, he was writing it when that happened. So
Mm,
it played into the way that the
good God.
movie
Yeah.
came together. He said a lot of interesting things that
Mm-hmm.
I'm I don't know how I don't know if they're intentionally obfuscating some of the
Yeah.
politics of the film.
Right.
He has said some stuff that sounds a little bit like pox on both their houses, but not
Yeah.
like not explicitly so, but then he's like backed up and said that's not exactly what I mean.
Feel like when we talk about this film, there are two things to talk about. The first is the film itself, and the second has been the PR rollout of the film. And
Yeah.
I think the PR rollout of the film, there has been a lot of pox on both houses, or we're not trying to take
Or,
sides.
or
I've
we're not
seen
trying to take
interviews with,
sides. Yeah.
yeah, I saw interviews with Kirsten Dunst. She is very explicit in trying to say that. So, and I get as a marketing
Yeah, that's
exercise why that is. But that said, to be fair, if people are pissed off about that, that's fair because I think again they're trying to market this in a certain way, and so if that's what they're saying, then they're reacting to something that is not necessarily in the film, but something that is real. Is the way I would put
they're reacting to something that's real. I mean, it was suggested to me that one thing they might be doing is the people that Alex Garland would really like to see this film
it. Mm.
probably are people that want to believe in the notion of pox on both their houses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And those are the exact people that need to see this movie.
Oh, maybe. Although this is where I don't know if they're going to get the right message from this movie. I guess would be the way to put it. Even if
That's
they go
like
see
that
it.
because some of the stuff's like I found the politics of this movie unsubtle,
Mm-hmm.
but I will just say I read reviews where the stuff that I noticed apparently did not get noticed by the
Yeah,
reviewer,
that
which
was
I
one. Yeah,
find
yeah,
wild.
yeah, yeah.
Like the fact that they missed it is itself kind of commentary.
I I guess so. Although, again, we can talk about this a little bit later. But like, also, I'm honestly curious, like how they, when did they film this, and like the whole making of it. Apparently, they shot it linearly. Correct? That's my understanding.
Yeah, and it's the most expensive movie A24 has ever made.
And A24 are the folks behind, among other things, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and a whole variety
Yeah,
of
and
other like
also a
great
bunch
movies.
of Alex Garland's other stuff.
Yeah,
They're like the arty and yet also kind of like their stuff tends to do okay, right? But there's like a whole aesthetic of the
yeah.
A24 film.
I'm going to make a joke, and you can delete this if you want to. It's the non-rapey form of Miramax.
It is kind of like it's not run by rapey people.
Yes, that's hopefully
Um
not. Yes.
they're behind like Midsummer and
Hmm.
Hereditary. Like one of their brands is kind of like art house horror, I
Right.
would say.
Hmm.
Um th- yeah, it is. This is very squarely in their wheelhouse,
Hmm.
and it is telling to me that they were willing to spend $50 million on a movie. I'm sure a lot of that is special effects, which is
Yeah.
weirdly ironic given some of the messages of the film.
True. Although I will say this, the special effects work in this film. Like it was,
Oh,
it
they're
is,
tangible.
yeah, like it is, you know, spoiler alert, the last, act of this film is, the invasion of Washington D.C. and I don't know how they
It
did it,
looks
but
like DC,
it looks like DC. It totally
and
looks
it
like
looks like
DC.
DC getting blown up.
Yeah. Actually, yes,
It
exactly.
is. I in fact, I will say to people who, if you have not seen this movie and you are, let's say, if you've been to some protests and that
Hmm.
has marked you in any way, like just be prepared for that.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
if you found January 6th very upsetting in a way that you don't want to be upset like that again, like just know going in,
Hmm.
those images plus,
Yeah.
you know,
Ironically,
magnifying it 1,000.
a movie in which PTSD plays a significant role also could potentially trigger some of it for some
Oh
people
yeah.
watching it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
You want to get
Um,
started, Dan? We've already said we're going to talk about stuff more later, so maybe
okay.
we should get to the later.
Sure. Well, we should get to Chekhov's What's It quickly. This is the thing that often appears in the first act of the film that winds up being somewhat relevant in the third act. What do you got, Anna?
Oh, sorry. I was spacing out, Dan, because I was thinking about what I was going to say. I was spacing out because I was thinking about how I was going to react to your first
Plot descriptions? Yeah.
plot description. But we can talk about Chekhov's What's It.
Just quickly. It's going to
Chekhov's.
take 30 seconds, you know.
Yeah, I know. All right. So you got what's yours? Did you say yours? That's how
Uh,
spaced out I was, Dan.
yes, that's how it's spaced out. I did not say mine. I asked yours first. I will go. I'll make it. I'll serve you up one because I'll say the simplest one, which is Chekhov's Nick Offerman,
Yeah. Yeah.
who is the play. It's interesting. He I think almost all of his screen time might be in the trailer, is the way I would put it.
Yeah.
In that he's not in the film that much, but he makes quite the presence in literally the first 2 minutes and last 2 minutes of the film.
And here's like the first spoilery part, which is
Yeah.
that people have been like, "Oh wow, Offerman is president. That's kind of weird." No, this is a real like the Nick Offerman that he usually plays.
Hmm.
Like that's who's president. Like,
Huh. I mean, leave it this way. Actually, Nick Offerman is a great actor, and like
oh yeah,
one of the
but I
things
mean,
we
like
yeah.
his
Go ahead.
asshole conservative dad character.
Yeah, although I live this way. That is an insult to Ron Swanson would be the way I would put it. Like this character is more buffoonish, far more
Yeah.
buffoonish.
Why
And so
Ron Swanson? Oh yeah, yes, sorry, yes. I confused Ron Swanson and Ron Burgundy, which would
oh,
also be an interesting president.
that could be. Oh God, it would actually would have been interesting if Will Ferrell had played this role. That's not
It
that you know.
would have
Uh,
been only a slight different direction, I
yeah,
think.
yeah, I agree.
But anyway, and Chekhov's Nick Offerman. But I would also say, and I know because we have a script here that you thought of this, but the
Yeah,
Chekhov's journalists predicting their deaths.
yeah. As I said, pretty much like I, leave this way. I
I
agree
mean,
with you.
not
There are
quite
aspects
the
of this.
people die that you think are gonna. I mean, there's some question about who dies. I mean, in the
Yeah, I
predicting
guess.
who would die.
Oh, in predicting
Like,
who's going to die. Well,
some people are gonna die, and you know
yeah,
how
you
they're
knew
gonna
people were
die.
going to die. I was not stunned at who died. Let's put it that way. Like I
Oh,
was,
it's a
yeah,
narrow.
yeah,
It's one or the other,
yeah.
right? Like,
Hmm.
anyway.
Hmm.
And we'll let. I was so excited to talk about the
You want me
plot.
to get to the plot? Let's get to the plot. All right, listeners, here we go. Act 1, wheel out the archetypes. Sometime in the near future, a second civil war has broken out in the United States, with the federal government fighting the Western forces of California and Texas, as well as the Florida Alliance. The buffoonish three-term president announces that the secessionists have suffered a massive defeat on the battlefield, and Anna, it's possible that he's engaging in some untruthful hyperbole with that declaration. in New York City.
A historic, I believe he says. He calls it like you might even say everybody's talking about it
Yes.
that people have approached him, big men,
Yeah.
strong men,
Powerful
and
men,
they've had
tears running
tears in
down
their
their
eyes.
eyes. Yep. 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 In New York City, there are water riots and suicide bombers, all captured on camera by our protagonist, legendary Reuters photojournalist Lee Smith. In the melee, Lee looks after Jessie, a young photographer who idolizes her. Lee and her Reuters colleague Joel hear that the Western forces are closing in on Washington. They plan to drive D.C., but... God damn it. Sorry, hold on. I'm doing this one more time, Karen. Lee and her Reuters colleague Joel hear that Western forces are closing in on Washington. They plan to drive to D.C. by way of Pittsburgh and Charlottesville, which is where the front lines are, to get into the capital and interview the president before he's deposed. They are warned off by their mentor Sammy, who's writing for what's left of the New York Times, but he eventually agrees to join them. Jessie also cadges her way onto their press van. All right, Anna, let's get into the politics of the film. Let's get this out of the way early. The movie is, I think, purposefully elliptical to some extent about the causes of the war. Like, we hear there's a reference to the fact that he's a 3-term president and that he disbanded the FBI, I believe. And I think consciously omits any actual
and
politics.
The Antifa massacre.
The Antifa massacre, which I laughed out loud when they said that. And I know some folks have nitpicked these scenarios to death. But, I mean, again, as you referenced, from the very first minute, this president seems like an obvious stand-in for Trump. I mean, the whole speech at the outset has Trump's cadence to it, to some extent.
Yeah, I don't think the sides of this are very subtle.
Right.
And I don't think that which side is the at least marginally more righteous side is subtle either.
No. The one thing I will say is that I think the geography is what's confused everyone. Everyone's like, well, wait, Florida and Texas are part of the rebellion. There we go. But like, obviously, you're supposed to think of the Western forces in the Florida Alliance as opposing the tyranny of a 3-term president who apparently decided he could disband the FBI.
Right. What I think this movie does is pose what if it was like the free states that seceded in the Civil War? Like, that is my assumption. Because if you notice, the flag of the Western Front is the American flag with 2 stars.
Right. One would assume.
And
California,
so
Florida,
I
Texas,
would say that it is Texas and California who think of themselves as representing one version of America.
Mm-hmm.
And to the argument, I do think the Texas-California alliance is a bit of a head fake and perhaps even a marketing ploy.
Yeah, that was my take as well. Again, like, that's the one way in which it's an obvious obfuscation, and you have no idea, and it does throw some confusion.
But the reason I wore my Beto shirt is that to remind people, like, I'll put it this way: there are more people who, if you do polling in Texas, there are more people here that are, say, pro-choice than there are pro-life. And there are more people that are, pro-immigration than there are here that are anti the kind of immigration stunts that our governor is pulling. If everyone who was on the left side of the political spectrum here picked up guns, we would win.
That's a good tagline when we'll get to at the end.
It's true. I mean, and also progressives control all of the major cities in Texas. I'm just pointing out the truth.
I'm not disagreeing with that. It was just the way you said that actually almost sounded like Will Ferrell and Ricky in Talladega Nights saying, "Do you know that progressives now control all the major cities in Texas?"
Oh, also
true.
It's gotten closer. I mean, also there's a bunch of people from California moving here, Dan.
True, although I do wonder which Californians are moving there. Like, I you have to be careful.
True too.
Yeah.
I mean, but I think it's sort of, and also there's sort of a demographic trends question. Yeah. But it is mostly a head fake.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Again, and part of this is that literally the first 2 minutes of the film, we see Offerman giving this speech and practicing the speech, and again talking about like the greatest battle in the history of the world, or what, like he's
greatest
like
victory.
He calls it, it's like the greatest history of military strategy or something. And the idea that we're supposed to automatically believe that he's full of shit also comes in the next sequence where we see Lee, our protagonist, watching this in a television, and then a bomb goes off in New York, like on the outskirts, making it clear that.
And I'll point out the politics there too, which is that there is a very clear racial difference. Like, the people that are not really rioting, I would say, about water, but definitely like trying to
Trying
push
to
their
get
way,
water. Yeah.
trying to get water, are almost entirely people of color.
Mhm.
And a suicide bomber runs in carrying an American flag, and she's a white girl.
Mhm.
Um, and this dynamic persists throughout the movie. There is one side that has. It's true, Dan. I kept
No,
count.
this is where. So honestly, this is where I do have a nit to pick, because it was not obvious to me for almost the entire rest of this film which forces they are with at various times during the conflict.
Oh, I think they're almost entirely with the Western
Western
forces.
forces. See, that
Yeah,
was not obvious to
because
me, because New York
the
initially.
American forces, they say pretty upfront, because
Mhm.
the forces of America,
Yeah, the
in
loyalist
quotes,
forces, whatever they're called.
the
Yeah, yeah,
loyalist
yeah.
forces in Washington, they shoot journalists on sight.
Right. Um, and so you're thinking, therefore, is that any time they encounter soldiers, it
They
must be
encounter
Western
militia
forces.
who don't shoot them on sight. Like the
Right.
guys at the gas station
Yeah.
are not formal soldiers.
Right. Right. There's a lot of there's a lot of malicious. This is one of the confusing things. Like so I guess this is where I'm not entirely sure I agree with you, because I think one of the points during almost the entire middle passage of this film is that we're not necessarily supposed to know which side we're seeing in terms of the
They're
fighting.
I disagree. I think
Okay,
that they're for the most part embedded with Western forces, because and then the times they aren't shot on sight, I
Mhm.
think they're mostly with people who are sympathetic to the loyalist forces.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, because also those are almost all white people, and the one black character, the one black
Right.
journalist, does not leave the car
Yeah. We'll get to this in a
when
little bit. The
when
o-
they encounter when they encounter the all white militia people. He never leaves the car.
Right. The only thing that threw me was that, like, at times I wasn't sure who were the soldiers who actually had uniforms versus not, because by the time at the end when we see the Western forces, they're the ones who seem extremely well equipped, and you know the ones in uniforms, it's ambiguous at times who they're on, which
I think
side
it's
they're on.
somewhat ambiguous, although I think it's for the most part the loyalist forces in the beginning of the movie. It's not until they get to the front lines
Hmm.
where we see the Western forces have like full gear.
Right. And I think that was what threw me, because like I was expecting at the time, my thought was, okay, if they've got uniforms, they're probably loyalist forces. If they're not, they're probably militia who are with the Western forces. But that gets it gets a little scrambled towards the end. So, but yeah, all right, let's keep going with the plot. Um,
Okay.
Act two, adrenaline junkie road trip.
Mm.
Sammy, Lee, Joel, and Jesse get in their big press van and get on the road. Fortunately, they have Canadian money, hard currency, which means they can buy gas when necessary. I did laugh at that line, 300 Canadian. I
Yeah.
hope all Canadians get to watch this film and have that one moment of Schadenfreude. On the road, they have a series of encounters, including just trying to get gas. They witness some intense urban combat. They spend the night at a refugee camp. They encounter a truly bizarre winter wonderland scene where two soldiers are trying to take out a sniper in a nearby house. All the while, Lee mentors Jesse, and Sammy continues to mentor Lee, while I think Joel is low key hitting on Jesse.
Mm.
Um, After all the adrenaline rushes from these sequences, our intrepid journalists drive through one small town that seems to be existing as if the war isn't happening. Lee and Jesse do have a lovely moment trying on some dresses. The ideal is shattered, however, when Sammy subtly points out the snipers covering the rooftops on Main Street. Anna, there are a lot of disturbing moments in this film, but for me, I think in some ways the scarier and more like sort of most disquieting move, and this is incredibly effective in the first half of the film, is the matter of fact way all the journalists simply accept the fact that there is a civil war. And I think this also works really well into Kirsten Dunst's performance, which is just amazing.
Mm.
In no
All the
small,
awards, just all the
yeah,
awards.
yeah. And I think, and it's not that she does anything flashy, and I think that's the important thing. She underplays a lot of her moments, but like, just this sort of, she really does a tremendous amount with not a ton. Like there's script moments, but like for her, mostly like the moments that I just could not stop looking at her is just watching her in the car where she's just processing everything.
Yeah.
And that was amazing.
So I think we're going to have a segment where I talk more even personally about this,
Mhm.
but what I found intensely disturbing
Mhm.
about the movie was that the journalists are more than matter of fact
Yeah.
about the Civil War.
Mhm.
They are in some ways relishing it.
They're adrenaline junkies. I mean,
Yeah, they're adrenaline
that is
junkies.
definitely one of the themes of this. Yeah.
And I think, like, there is a point where Dunst is like, you're not supposed to talk, you're not supposed to you're not supposed to get
Yeah.
involved, you're not supposed to ask these people questions.
Right.
And I think that she's kind of lying to everyone, including herself, about like, oh, we don't get involved. They're involved.
So I was curious about this because there's two times where she says something that a lot of people think are important lines, and I thought they were like talking points that she is telling herself to justify what she does.
Yes.
The first is like, I did this overseas so that we wouldn't do this at home, and I'm like, that's not why you did it. And the second one is the line that you just said. And so I mean, I think these are things that you are taught maybe in journalism 101 if you ever take that, thinking that sort of justifies what you do. But I mean, the reality is just not in any way consistent with that, I think.
The reality of being a journalist is that you love doing it. Hold on, you fucking actually.
Sorry, Karen.
What is it? What are you doing? Okay. So what I was saying is that the reality is people become journalists, especially combat journalists, but I would extend that to political journalism in general to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Because you love it.
Right.
Because you love covering this shit. I think I'm not unique in saying one of the reasons I love being a journalist is I get to be the first person to know things. I get to be right there when shit happens.
Right.
Now, there is another layer to my love of journalism that I do believe that it is a part of being a functional democracy.
Oh yeah, no, I don't mean to diminish the idea. Like, yeah, that's an important part.
Yeah, and so what she says is not untrue.
Yes, that's correct. But
it's also not why they're there.
Yeah.
And I think that this movie really, I mean, what made me stop and think, and why I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, is it gets at that pressure point that I think a lot of my colleagues don't want to think about sometimes. That I have benefited from the Trump era personally.
Right. No, I have as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is something that I hope I don't forget.
Yeah.
That I have discomfort about.
Listeners may or may not know this. I just started an academic partnership with State Street Associates. They're a financial firm. They're paying me not a huge amount of money, but some money to offer them geopolitical risk. And it's a constant reminder that much like a journalist, teaching international relations is a counter-cyclical profession. And unfortunately for me, business is booming right now. And that I have dealt with that for the last 20 years in terms of like wrestling with that. And that is it's a quandary. In some ways, for journalism, it's, I think, an even more direct quandary because I can sit back and sort of just read and analyze. You guys actually have to go into the field and figure out what is going on.
Yeah, and I want to talk more about that.
Okay.
Later. I mean, I think it's always fun when we're like, I'm going to talk more about that. But it is important that we get through the fucking plot of the movie.
Yes.
So.
All right. We'll be right back after this ad for the Portland Maoists.
I'm trying to think of a good follow-up line for that.
Coffee grows out of the barrel of a gun.
I don't know. I was trying to think of a line from the movie.
Oh, sorry.
But sure. Let's see. And we are back.
And
I think the only line I can think of is like seeing gunfire and saying I'm hard for it.
I forgot about that. Jesus. Wow. Yeah. Talk about it. I mean, that was the ultimate adrenaline junkie.
Unsubtle.
Yeah.
Unsubtle.
Yeah. All right.
Oh, actually, that makes me one more thing, which is that I think that the thing between Joel and Jesse is that's a little bit of just what happens on the road, kind of. Sure. I was really glad that nothing happened from it.
I was fine. I mean, Jesse's of age. Like, she's 23. He's a little bit older.
He doesn't look that old. Like,
yeah, no. It wasn't. I didn't mean to imply anything. It's just that Jesse was clearly sort of low key hitting on, or I'm sorry, that Joel was clearly low key hitting on Jesse. I just wanted that noted.
But it didn't feel like he was pressuring her, and
No,
it
absolutely
felt
not.
like that is
Yeah.
kind of part of the
Totally fair. Yeah.
weirdness of being on the road together.
Here's my question: do you think Joel and Lee at one point had hooked up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I was just making sure. Well, that was the same vibe I had. Yep. Okay. Good. Good.
Sure. That.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep. 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 All right. Let's get to Act 3. I know what Reuters is.
Doesn't sound American, Dad.
I gotta say that line. Oh God! All right, let's just get to this. While on the road, another SUV catches up to our journalists, and it turns out to be their colleague Tony and his driver Bohai. Demonstrating their addiction to adrenaline, Tony and Jesse switch places while the cars are moving. Seems just really stupid. A mile or two down the road, Lee's van stops when they see the SUV with Jesse and Bohai abandoned on the side of the road. They encounter two soldiers with numerous executed civilians who seem to be in the process of burying them in a mass grave. They are also holding Jesse and Bohai at gunpoint. Lee, Joel, and Tony decide to approach them, with Sammy warning that is a terrible idea. Sure enough, the head soldier inquires about where all the group's members come from to determine whether or not they're real Americans. He kills Tony and Bohai because they're foreign. Just as he's about to execute all of them, Sammy saves the day by running over the soldiers with the press van. They escape, but Sammy is hit by one of the soldiers returning fire. He dies by the time the group reaches a Western Forces camp in Charlottesville. Anna, a couple things about this. First of all, Jesse Plemons, holy fucking shit. Like, he's only in the movie for like 5 minutes, but, it is just
He's terrifying.
Terrifying 5 minutes. Also, whoever came up with the idea of giving him those red sunglasses is just
the rose-colored sunglasses.
The rose color. Okay, very good. But like, just a piece of costuming that should win an Oscar. But also props to Garland. I mean, this is a movie about capturing the images and horrors of war, presumably. And it is unsurprising because this is consistent with all of his movies. There are some truly gorgeous and effective shots here. I think my favorite one is a very simple one, which is like it's only on the screen for 2 seconds, but it's a shot of like an underpass, a bridge underpass, where on the front someone has written "Go Steelers" to indicate they're probably in the Pittsburgh area, and in the back you see two corpses hanging from nooses. Anna, any of your favorite images?
There is kind of a central set piece battle when they go on the road.
The urban one,
and yeah. Yes. And they're both shooting, Jesse and shooting. It's, not a coincidence that we call it shooting, probably.
No, and like, and it also Garland clearly shoots the film like this, and you see the soldiers lean out, and then you see the photographers leaning out and doing the exact same thing. Yeah,
and this movie is so about itself in a way, right? Or about the ways we consume images of war, and the way that they shoot. Again, it's hard to say not shoot, right?
Yeah.
The way that you see the war from
the way they
perspective of camera is a reminder to me. Camera cuts out a lot. Like that is one of the things that we're seeing is that we only see parts of it.
Yeah.
Right. We only see what we're allowed to see. I think, one of Lee's lines is the rejection of shots is, 30-1.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
No,
go ahead.
I just think that the drama of those scenes, you are also caught up in the adrenaline that they are caught up in, right? Like you're excited to see these beautiful images, and they are beautiful. I mean, it's as beautiful as any other Alex Garland movie.
Yeah.
The difference with it is, I think, in some of his films, there is a distance from violence. There's an aestheticization.
No, and
in this
that
movie
is
there
not
isn't.
the case. No, in fact, if anything, it's the opposite.
You feel violence. It's very close.
So I would say this is, and it's interesting. You're right. The imagery is beautiful. The sound design is
so good.
Consciously aggressive. There are a number of times where there is a single shot fired, and I was like jumping in my seat a little bit because it's shocking. Even though, again, it's a movie about a civil war, but like you are designed to be. The movie makes it clear you should be repulsed by the violence, would be the way I would put it. It's not It's not aestheticizing it at all, except maybe.
And again, I would say if anyone has any kind of like PTSD triggering, like this This is not cartoon violence. This is
No,
not
no.
um and there's cruelty and
Yep.
there's uh, abuses. It's
There's human
all
rights
there.
abuses. There's violations
Yeah.
of the laws of war. There's a whole bunch of bad shit going down in this Civil War. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is akin to all civil wars,
I would say
unfortunately.
the most affecting shot is when Sammy dies, right? That they're driving through the forest fire.
Mm-hmm.
And not most affecting, there's a lot of
Yeah.
affecting, but one of the most gorgeous
Yeah.
sequences
Yeah.
is as Sammy is dying, they're driving through a forest fire and sparks are landing. Sparks are surrounding them like fireflies.
Actually, for me, it was almost, and it was funny.
And Sammy's caught up in that beauty.
Right. And also the scene right after that is where they're showing like the helicopters all flying in
Yeah.
a gorgeous countryside. It has to have been designed to consciously evoke Apocalypse Now. Like I was half expecting Ride of Valkyrie to start playing as the forces assemble. And of course, it then goes in, it closes in the van, and like we see that Sammy's dead. So it's let me put it this way. This is also a movie that you can argue is having a conversation with other war movies. That's the
and
one
other
way in which
about journalism, perhaps.
Yeah. But like we talk about this, in a lot of ways, this is a movie much more about journalism than about war. But there are times where it is consciously talking to other films about war. And I think that was one of those moments.
Yeah.
All right, let's close out the plot. Act 4, White House down. No, seriously, it's really fucking down. In Charlottesville, other embedded reporters tell Lee and Joel that most U.S. forces have already surrendered, leaving only a few diehards and the Secret Service boys to protect D.C. and the president. Joel is furious that they won't get to D.C. first and that Sammy's death was therefore meaningless. They embed with Western forces during the final assault on the Capitol. Jesse, sorry, go ahead.
I have to jump in right here, which is previewing something about how I do think this movie is about journalism and interrogating journalism. Is Joel really mad that Sammy's death is meaningless? I feel like Joel's really mad because they missed the fucking story that he thought they were going to get.
No, Joel is absolutely mad because he lost the fucking story. Yes. But I mean, he says that. That's why I did. But yeah.
He says that Sammy's death is meaningless.
No, Joel is upset. I know. Joel's upset. I am with you 100% on this. Joel is mostly pissed off because he's lost the scoop. Also,
they think they've lost the scoop.
But also, that was, by the way, this was something. Now, I was going to ask you about this because one of the things I did like also, and this, you don't see a ton of scenes on this, but when they encounter the other embedded reporters, this sort of competitiveness among them about who's going to get, there first. And like that felt real. I don't know about,
Oh, yeah. No, it felt real. And there's also, I think there's a back and forth about whether or not they're really competing with the New York Times.
Right.
And as other people have pointed out, the real sci-fi of this movie is the fact that there's so many working journalists.
Yes, that was, damn it, you stole my best line in the debris field, Anna. I was like, that was the most awesome special thing. Also, there's no editors telling him, no, you can't spend the money on this. What are you doing? That stuff.
I will, so couple points.
Yeah.
The fact that they're from Reuters explains a lot about how much money and freedom they have.
Good for Reuters.
Reuters is a wire service that is still willing to put people on the road and still willing to invest in this kind of thing. Reuters has a lot of international coverage, has a lot of international journalists. It's almost just lucky that they happen to be both American. Lucky for them.
Yeah.
When you meet Reuters people on the road, they are often from other countries, covering the U.S. I thought it'd been really funny if they'd said they're from The Guardian, and also would have been The Guardian is also a publication because it's publicly funded, would also have the kind of resources to spend on this. I think it's funny that Sammy is maybe the only New York Times journalist and he has to hitch a ride.
Well, no, like, don't they literally say at the beginning of what's left of the New York Times? I mean, the implication is that
they do.
The implication is the Times is gone. So, pretty decrepit.
Barely hanging on. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, they embed with Western forces during the final assault on the Capitol. Jessie comes into her own as a photographer while Lee has an episode of PTSD right outside the White House. The Secret Service tries to escape in the Beast, but Lee figures out pretty quickly that the president is still in the building. The Western forces go room by room in the White House, telling the reporters to stick with them. When Jessie stands in the middle of the hallway to get a shot, Lee rushes out to save her and gets hit and killed by crossfire. Jessie captures Lee's death. Sorry, Karen. Jessie captures Lee's death in a series of photographs as she falls, then leaving her behind to continue to document the attack. The soldiers... Yep, go ahead.
I just want to point out. So this movie is also in conversation with other war photography,
Mm-hmm.
and that shot
Mm-hmm.
of Lee looks a lot like Robert Capa's shot in the Spanish Civil War.
Oh,
His shot
okay.
of one of the militiamen falling backwards as he
Oh,
dies.
interesting. Okay. The soldiers find the president hiding in the Oval Office behind the Resolute desk and are about to kill him when Joel says, wait, and demands a quote. The president pleads for his life, and Joel says that's good enough. The film ends with Jesse taking photos of the Western Forces soldiers posing with the executed president, and one of those photos slowly being developed, which is a haunting final shot. All right, Anna, let's get into this. I liked a lot of this film, and I know that you loved it, but I'm going to air my grievances now because there were a few things that legitimately pissed me off and took me out of the film, particularly at the end. Yep.
Can we address them as you say them?
Sure.
Can I address them as you say them? Okay.
Yeah. All right, let's go this in order. The first is, even if Lee has PTSD, I get why she rushes out to, push Jesse down. But the idea that she would have done that and then would have stood in the middle of the hallway as opposed to actually, tackling her as a way to sort of save both of their lives. It was a beautiful cinematic death, and I sort of appreciate that on an aesthetic grounds. But I was not crazy about that plot twist.
Do you think that maybe a photographer would want to die a beautiful cinematic death, Dan?
I think that a photographer would want to take a picture of a beautiful cinematic death. I don't know if they want to be the object of it.
I think that there is a version of this that Lee recognizes that she froze
That she's
a bunch.
had it? Yeah.
And she's had it. And what does she say about Sammy? There were a lot worse ways for him to go.
I know that, but I guess that is a plausible
and
plot.
She's giving
right
Jesse a great shot. I will tell you that the thing that I found that I wanted to happen, it wouldn't have actually necessarily been that accurate, but that it would have been sort of fitting for the movie. I wanted Jesse to grab her camera on her way to the Oval Office, to grab Lee's camera.
That would have been good. Let me put it this way. Part of this was that I kept thinking, well, okay, so I see we're watching A Star Is Born, but in a Civil War. That was part of it, in that I can accept your interpretation, and there are ways in which Dunst's performance suggests that's where it's going. I guess I'm just not a fan of the sort of, suicide by Civil War ending. It's profoundly infuriating to me. Yeah.
I can think you can get infuriated at her for feeling that way and like wanting Lee to have more of a desire to live.
Yeah.
But I think that she's thinking about, if I'm going to go, I may have lost it. She's thinking like, I would see it as I have lost it. I lost my killer instinct. I lost my ability to be able to function under these conditions.
Well, maybe this goes to critique of capitalism. I guess my point is that just because you've lost that instinct for a brief moment doesn't mean that's a bad decision to make as a result of that.
I think I agree with you, but I also think that, again, what I think is the really compelling piece of evidence that it was not necessarily intentionally suicidal, but perhaps one of those things that happens. And I think that this is how a lot of, in the heat of the moment, and she's just, I wouldn't mind dying this way.
Possibly. I think this is also where
it's not like she thought about it and she's like, I'm gonna sacrifice myself for Jesse, but more of that sense of like, ugh.
It might have been also that I think another problem I had here was that I felt like there was a missing scene with Lee before the attack on the Capitol, where like you see why the PTSD is emerging at that exact moment. I mean, it's implied, but like
I think it's implied because of Sammy.
Yeah, obviously it's because of Sammy, but like it was. I think honestly, like another 30 seconds just to understand why. Like, because I was sort of surprised. You see the assault on the Capitol. It's an amazing series of visual sequences, and then you see the attack on the White House, and Lee has already lost it by that point, and like you're just not sure why. And that was I mean, I think you're obviously right that it was due to Sammy, but I almost wanted there needed to be one more piece of connective tissue. I guess that would be the way I would put it.
I think that one flaw of the movie, and one of the reasons why I think it has generated the divergent interpretations, is because Alex Garland is erring on the side of less information.
That's correct. Yeah. And in some cases, I think that's the right choice to make. I don't think that's the right choice to make for the protagonist. And I guess that's the, yeah. All right. Second thing. I did laugh out loud at this point. They're about to execute the president, and Joel says, "Wait!" And I need a quote. There is no fucking way they're listening to the reporter in that instance. I refuse to believe that. I actually, that was the one time I laughed at the film, I think, rather than with the film. I couldn't.
And I'm going to disagree.
Okay, go ahead.
I think one thing that this film is about the collusion between journalists and soldiers.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
And about the ways that when a journalist is covering a war, it is the side that protects them that they're going to kind of, be more on the side of. But also, soldiers, the kind of soldiers that would protect a journalist are the kind that realize that journalism is valuable to them.
By the way,
this sort of relationship benefits their aims as much as it benefits a journalist.
And I will say this was striking to me because, again, I do think it's more ambiguous in the middle parts of the film, like which forces they're embedded with at various times. But what is clear is that in the final assault, it was very clear, and this had to have been intentional. You see the soldiers constantly protecting those journalists in a way that you had not seen it throughout the entire film. And that was interesting to me. Yeah.
And I would say that part of that is okay, that this is a value for these soldiers.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it is a value because there is self-interest in protecting journalists that are embedded with you.
Yeah. No,
right?
you're doing good and you're doing well at the same time.
The criticisms of embedded journalists in the Iraq War.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Is
that you will cover their side of it. Yep. Like if people are protecting your lives, you are much less likely to think of what they're doing as war crimes.
Yep.
Like, and I think that in that moment, they know that Joel's not going to keep them from killing the guy.
That's true. No, that is absolutely true.
They know that to the extent that Joel is being a journalist in that moment, he is on their side with it. And that I think that it's a little, it is perhaps not completely true to life, but it is true to the instinct of soldiers in that moment to want to give the journalists
the quote,
their line of fire.
Yeah.
And I would say this when I'm going to pull my journalist card is that when you're embedded in a campaign, like you will get favors.
Sure.
Like you will receive things that perhaps people on the outside might find implausible, that is something that you would get, like from a quote, access, whatever. But it is because of the transactional relationship that you have. So that is just the most vivid example of access journalism you can possibly find.
Okay, last one. And again, you're going to push back on this, I know. But this is where Anna's always objected at various times to typing in sci-fi films. And this is barely a sci-fi film, and it does qualify in that it's in the future and so forth. But in a film that is really about journalism, with two of the main characters being print journalists, we never see anyone write or type a single fucking word during this entire film. As a writer, I was offended. Like, at no point is anyone filing copy. At no point is anyone writing up anything. The photographers are uploading photos. There's that shot in the beginning of like Lee doing that. And I get that, like, as in terms of photojournalism, that's fine. Felt totally fair for me. But Joel and Sammy are supposed to be print journalists, and they don't do anything except, like observe, which is fine. But like, there was no writing.
A couple things. Okay. One is that maybe I'll actually post this video. I am holding up my notebook that I have used when covering things on the run.
Yeah.
Like there's things in here that are very sloppily written because I was like literally taking notes like in a moment when I could.
Right.
Right. And I especially noted when that happened in the movie because it's a notebook that looks like mine.
Okay.
There is the scene where they are in combat with what I believe is the Western forces. There is very prominently a black man who is caught in the fire there. And
right, he's pinned down to that. He's in the column, and then he gets hit. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Joel starts scribbling. He's holding a notebook. Like
I missed the scribbling there, so I grant you that point.
Throughout the scene, he's holding a notebook. So, and also there is a similar notebook that I have like that is called a rocket book, and you can take pictures. It will record your scribbling and do a text and do like a handwriting to text
Oh,
thing.
cool. Okay.
So if this is the future and he's scribbling, I'm saying there might be some way that it's getting getting uploaded to the cloud, and that's how he's filing. And the last thing I'll say is the reason I get upset about showing typing in sci-fi films is typing is the least important part of a lot of this stuff.
Mhm.
And I think typing is actually one of the least important parts of this kind of journalism, where witnessing, anyone can fucking type. Anyone can file a story. What they're doing that makes them different is being there. And also, typing is boring, and I think the choice as a filmmaker to be like, that happens off screen is not a terrible one.
I'm not saying I wanted 20 minutes of typing. It would have almost
And
been.
one of the other reasons I object
Yeah.
to typing in sci-fi movies is, and I've said this, is that I think surely in 100 years, there'll be a better way to file stories.
However, of course, in this scenario, which I assume was like, basically sometime the next 10 years,
might have a Rocket Book where it recognizes your handwriting.
all I know, I just would have wanted to have seen the print reporters actually do a little more work. It was interesting to me that let me put it this way, there were times where I wasn't sure Joel was actually a journalist and not more of a Sherpa, frankly. And so that,
yeah, I think it's a narrative choice though to not. I mean,
yeah,
like, I mean, you could have done it in the same way that they show it. There is when I had a moment of like, wait, like Jesse's using an SLR, like she's shooting on film.
No, that
like,
I was struck by that as well.
And so then they have a scene
Yes.
where they show
How-
how she is using film to still eventually, hopefully, file digitally.
Right. That was the thing that I couldn't.
Perhaps that scene with Joel
Mhm.
would have been helpful, so
Yes.
that you have a moment where you're like, wait, but how is he filing? And he's like doing the filing like while they talk. But it's harder to talk and type than it is to develop photos and type.
Yeah.
So I understand the narrative choice to not necessarily show that.
I think this isn't it wouldn't have been a hard fix. Like even just all you needed was like a scene when they were in the car.
It's an imperfect movie.
Yeah. All right.
It's imperfect.
Yeah. But again, like that was just, it was something that struck me. And like, actually, this goes, by the way, to the point in terms of the riots in New York. One of the things I noticed as that plays out, did you notice there were no camera phones at all during that?
This is what I was thinking about the SLR too.
Yeah.
And I'll have more to say about that in a little bit.
Good. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Story time. What am I saying? Sorry,
Karen.
And speaking of having more to say in a little bit, Dan, I have a question for you.
Oh, please ask away, Anna.
Is there IR in this movie about a civil war?
No. What are you talking about? I didn't see any. You think this was an IR film? What? I don't get it. No. Anna, there is no version of attempting to answer this that isn't a mistake. But I will try to do so. There is definitely some IR in this film. Actually, it's not so much IR as comparative politics, in that this is about a civil war. I mean, there's very few mentions of other countries. Actually, one of the sort of dogs not barking in this film, which I was legit curious about, would have been whether other countries would have intervened in the Civil War. Like, among other things, possible that Canada would have wanted to have annexed New England, because I bet New England would have been willing to join him.
Oh yeah, no, that was my interpretation of that. Was like New England was like, peace out,
see ya,
literally peace out.
Yep, that's exactly what they would have done. And
10 miles outside Boston, Dan, what do you think they were doing?
A big mythical mountain, apparently. But to get to the politics of civil wars, this film actually provides very strong empirical support for contention made by my former colleague at the University of Chicago, Stathis Kalyvas, who is sort of a giant in the field of studying civil wars. Basically, his argument is that questions about civil wars are always about whether or not they are about greed or about grievance. In other words, are they about the distribution of spoils, or are they about like lingering resentments in terms of ethnic cleavages or class cleavages or what have you? And his point is that often if you take a look at violence in civil wars, there's two things going. Basically he argues that there are two things going on. There is often a master cleavage that sort of divides the forces to explain why one side is fighting the other side. But there are also a ton of petty local disputes that are reinterpreted through that lens, or often that lens excuses violence that otherwise wouldn't necessarily have occurred. And I'm going to quote him here. Civil wars are not binary conflicts, but complex and ambiguous processes that foster an apparently massive, though variable, mix of identities and actions. Actions on the ground often seem more related to local or private issues than to the war's driving or master cleavage. Also, individual and local actors take advantage of the war to settle local or private conflicts, often bearing little or no relation to the causes of the war or the goals of the belligerents. We see that dynamic play out in multiple scenes in this film. We see it in the gas station scene. We see it with Jesse Plemons, dealing with the war dead. And we see it most spectacularly, and this was my favorite scene in this entire film, the scene with the Winter Wonderland, where it's just two soldiers looking at a sniper, and Joel is asking them questions about, like, which side are you on? And by the way, this is another one where I'm talking about it being ambiguous, because literally they have this conversation where Joel's like, which side are you on? And like, they don't really answer. And, one can quibble with Garland for trying to stay apolitical, at least in the marketing of this. But the political science does suggest that he has a point, that you can look at huge, political arguments often wind up just devolving or being mapped around settling local feuds. And that's what happens during the course of this film until the final act, which I found was interesting.
I think it's interesting. I think one reason that I've felt such pushback when people say that this movie is centrist or apolitical is that, for me, there is an overarching question that I think has specific political valence and a moral question on it, and that there is one side of that war that falls on the side of good and right in terms of that larger discussion. But that Garland is very interested in showing how there is a cost no matter what. And that the fog of war, which we see in a literal way a lot, we all walk in it, right? We all walk in that fog of war. I do think his choice to have actors of color only appear on one side is pretty specific.
This assumes that you're interpreting during the middle part of the film all of the actors that are of color being on that particular side. And I think in the end, you're probably correct. But I also think it's not always obvious, actually, when you're watching.
It's not always obvious, but I feel pretty good about it. Like the the bodies in that trench where Jesse Plemons, a lot of them are people of color.
Although what's interesting is that, again, like this was this shot where you see Jesse lying in them. They all look white because he had been throwing lye on them, I'm assuming. So
that's all right. But, and also, of course, and as you know, he interrogates them about where they're from.
Right. No, that's, again,
and asks them, like, who's a real American.
Yeah.
And then also, I think it's interesting. I do think that Christmas scene is terrifying, and it shows, a fog of war moment, a moment where the sides really are confused. I think they might not have been as confused if those soldiers had been black or had been not white. I'm just going to say.
Well, one of them was white. One of them was Asian, I was pretty sure. The one with the gun.
I don't know.
No, I'm pretty sure he was, actually. But, like, again, the point of that scene is, in fact, to talk about.
No, the point of that scene is that things get blurry.
Exactly.
Along the margins.
That's what I'm saying.
Especially.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that, and I also think it is perhaps it's because I just think everything is politics, right? Like, it is a political point to say that things get fuzzy along the margins. It's a political point to say that not everyone involved in a civil war, even if they're on the side of justice, is a good actor.
It's not just a political point; it's a political science point. I mean, he's right about that. And so, and it's not, and that in that essence, I don't think it's a dodge, and I don't think it's a way of thinking about it.
Once again, we'll have more to say about that.
Okay.
I'll have more to say about that in a second here, Dan.
That's a good point. Anna, this reminds me, I have a question to ask you.
Oh, what is it?
Is there a critique of capitalism in this film?
Dan, don't let them kill me. And actually, I actually don't let them kill me if I decide to change the question that you usually ask me. Because at least in this moment, like I was thinking the question that I want to answer, and maybe it would be a good thing to change this question because I don't always have like a critique of capitalism, but
Mhm.
I was thinking about having you ask me, Anna, how do you really feel? Um,
You know what? Let me just rephrase that. Let's do it. Let's do it for this because there is capitalism in this film, but there's not a ton of it. So, Anna,
yeah.
how do you really feel?
So some story time.
Okay.
Uh, I have not covered a war. I have covered and been involved in protests,
Mhm.
and I have covered Trump rallies.
Mhm.
And that line where Joel says, like, I looking at the gunfire and says that gets me hard.
Mhm.
Like it that's a stab to my heart. Because I don't think that there's a working journalist out there that doesn't get excited about possible violence.
Hmm.
That you might hate it, you might know that it's wrong,
But that doesn't mean
but
the reaction isn't genuine.
that's right. And of the specific story I was thinking about was I was at a Trump rally in 2016 in Wisconsin, and it was a smaller rally. Um, and maybe that's what made it feel the way that it did. There was at one point where Trump, as he traditionally did, he's asked people to turn around, and there's the 2-minute hate
Yeah, boo the
on
journalists,
the
right?
simple journalism.
Yeah.
There weren't very many of us
Mhm.
because it wasn't a very big event,
Yeah.
and it, that is one of the most disturbing things I felt in my life.
Hmm.
Is when a crowd turns on you and does not see you as a human.
Right. They're othering you.
And yeah, othering you in a way that feels pretty intense and dangerous,
Mhm.
to be honest. Also to the relevant to the story or relevant to discussions movie is I in 2016 had these lenses that adapted my iPhone into something like an SLR.
Hmm.
Um and it was really great because it allowed me to get closer to the action, because there's this thing like if you're if you're a photojournalist, sometimes like Secret Service and whatnot will let you a little bit closer
Oh, I
because they
see. Okay.
recognize
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you
yeah.
need to get your shot.
Right.
Like you need to ask your quote,
Yeah.
actually. So it was a little bit after the rally ended and I was going around taking photos, and I took one photo and this guy caught me taking his picture, and he came up to me and he was going to grab
The camera.
my phone,
Yeah.
and he was like, I didn't give you, he kind of reached out his hand, not really serious, but like he was like, hey, I didn't give you permission to take that picture. And I was like, well, I'm a journalist
Mhm.
and you're here and this is a public space. And he was like, I didn't give you permission. And I kind of froze. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I do remember him saying, how would you feel if I followed you home? And I deleted that photo, Dan. I will tell you, I deleted that photo.
Huh.
I am brave, but not that brave.
Mhm.
But it was also really fucking exciting. I had a story to tell.
Yeah, yeah.
And afterwards, driving home, I had this incredible mix of emotions because I knew it would make a good story. And my, I, f- it was PTSD. I mean, like
Mm.
it was, I, I felt physically threatened by someone
You felt
in
the
the
rush of
course of doing,
cortisol.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it was in the course of doing my job. And I don't think that is the one time in my life where I felt like I was targeted because I was a journalist,
Mhm.
and that was, and I was othered
Mhm.
because I was a journalist. And
And it was in your face. It wasn't online, or it wasn't,
yeah,
Yeah,
oh
yeah,
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 I mean
yeah.
people threaten my
Right,
life
I was gonna
online
say.
all the time,
Yeah.
but like it was, and he was not afraid to do it.
Yeah.
And I thought about that watching this movie,
Hmm.
like, and also the safety that I felt behind a camera,
Mhm.
like it can give you the sense of like, well, I'm here doing this. And that's what I thought a lot about watching them, as you see them take photos and then you see the photos they've taken,
Mhm.
and it is a a kind of distancing that you get. It is a prop that your
Sure.
notebook and your camera are things that you think give you some safety.
Mhm.
And I think in some ways, like when you have the PTSD reaction, when you have the reaction like Kirsten Dunst in the battle, in that build up to going to the White House, you lose your sense of I'm not you are actually one of the things that happens is you're confronted with the fact that oh no, this is just a camera.
Yeah. There's an effective sequence early on that Garland shoots of like Dunst in all these various war zones where like she sees the horrors of war. And that was again well done. And in some ways that was almost like I wish he had added like a little bit of a fillip at the end right before she has her PTSD episode. But it does explain like the PTSD doesn't come out of nowhere. So it's that in that sense
Right.
it's good. Yeah.
And I also wanted to say that I think this interrogation of journalism and righteousness, journalists can be very righteous about the side that they're on,
No.
you know.
Really? Really? Okay.
And it doesn't necessarily mean you're on the wrong side. And that's what I thought was so interesting about this movie is that I do think that there is a side that Garland indicates is a more preferable side, as a side that is at least coming at this from a higher moral ground. But that the other thing he shows over and over is the dangers of getting of the dangers of war in general, in that you can get pushed from righteousness to glory to glee, you
To
know,
again human rights abuses. Yeah, I mean
to human rights
actually
abuses.
the movie that this reminded me of a little bit in that sense, that's the same message in Saving Private Ryan, weirdly. um
Yeah,
yeah. No, the opening assault
it's
on
been a while since I've seen Saving Private Ryan,
there's
so
an
I'm just not. I'll let you. That's sure.
there's just an opening scene, the beach assault on Normandy. It ends with American soldiers executing Nazis who had surrendered, and
Right.
Miller sees that and like he doesn't know quite what to do with it. But the fact that Spielberg shoots that is to indicate that this is supposed to be the good war. Bad things are done by the good side. Yeah.
And I think that that's something that Garland is really interested in, and I will take a specific. I think there are homages to our other Civil War in this, right? And one of the more specific ones is that one of the big battles takes place at the Lincoln Memorial, right? And I've been thinking about Lincoln a fair amount because I've been watching Manhunt, which is not good. People shouldn't watch it. But I missed Tobias Menzies so much that I'm just using it as my like terror methadone to like
to ease off. I get it. Yeah.
To ease off.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons I don't like it is that it's a hagiography of Lincoln that is some ways, what I'm about to say is in some ways deserved, but it's bothersome to me because every single Black person in this movie is uniformly just like, oh, my hero died, like it's just as though there is no controversy over him, that as though everyone who is on the Union side was good and perfect and true, and that there is a little bit of mixed with that.
I'm gonna bring this up again. Spielberg handled this better. Like this in Lincoln, there's a Black soldier who points out the various things Lincoln doesn't do, and again shows the horrors of war. Just saying.
But at the same time, I think one reason why Lincoln is revered by some of us more. I mean, the reason I have what I see in Lincoln that draws me is his refusal to take joy in righteousness.
Yeah.
Is that
and that comes
he
through
represents
the second inaugural more than anything else. Yeah.
Yes, that he believes that we are he's on the side of the angels. He believes that this is a good and true cause, but he cannot take pleasure in this. He cannot believe that that the moral superiority justifies even like it justifies what's happened, but you don't have to like feel good about that. Right. Like,
which is very difficult to do as a politician when you are leading a victorious war.
And a soldier for fucking sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
But I think, the Lincoln Monument is destroyed.
For me, like there's a lot of disturbing elements in this film, like, and this was in the trailer, and so I knew it was going to happen. But still, seeing the Lincoln Memorial blown up by a rocket was just really fucking disturbing.
And it's blown up by the side
by the
that's
Western
on the
forces.
More righteous side.
Yeah.
Right. So, other thing that I want to bring up in the how do I really feel section here is that I think that this movie is very much in dialogue with the sort of theory of photography and the theory of journalism. There's a very famous essay Susan Sontag wrote in the New Yorker about war photography, where she makes the argument is we like to think of war photography as being a lens into the truth as
Hmm.
being like a thing that represents the horrors of war,
Hmm.
but that actually everyone you cannot take a photograph that isn't purely,
No, of course
you
not.
know, purely without
Yeah.
context or purely showing something
Hmm.
that has a message of like, no, war is you can't even say a photograph is all war is bad,
Yeah.
right? Like every photograph we take leaves out something. Again, that's part of the movie. Every photograph we take has a side to it.
There was, I don't even remember the precise nature of the quote, but it was a Janet Malcolm who said that like anyone who engages in an act of journalism is also at their heart a little bit of a sociopath.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that observation was running through me as I was watching this film, is the way I would put it.
Yeah. And I think that, you brought up Spotlight, and I've brought up All the President's Men as examples of
Hmm.
like movies that about journalism that, are pretty great portrayals of journalism. But in some ways, the reason why I think this movie I don't know if it has enough flaws. I don't know if it's like a better movie, but it is to me a more compelling portrait of journalism is that it doesn't disguise the glee that journalists have in being in on the story.
Yeah.
That and that's not pretty. I mean, it's not something that I, I remember 2016 being out on the trail and people coming up to me and being like, "Thank you," like liberal types, being like, "Thank you for doing
Uh,
this." Like, we really need
mhm.
you, and it, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm,
I want it.
but it's one of the reasons I hated when the Washington Post went to "Democracy dies in darkness" as their motto.
Which, to be
Like,
fair,
fuck
Marty
you.
Baron wasn't a huge
Like,
fan of, but yeah. Although that
yeah.
said, I
Like,
have
I
a
mean,
T-shirt that says "Democracy Dies in Darkness" because I was writing for the
and
Post
I
at the
also
time.
like I think journalists should vote. I think
Yeah.
we should take a side, but like I think we shouldn't fool ourselves that we are on a side.
Yeah. No, in some ways, this goes to the question. And actually, again, there's a similar debate within the academy of can you be thoroughly detached and objective as an observer. And one of the things that I think you can argue that has happened in recent decades is the acknowledgement of no, that's impossible. But that doesn't mean you don't try and still acknowledge the biases that exist. Also, I just want to say the Janet Malcolm quote just to make sure I say it accurately. Every journalist who is not too stupid or too full of himself to notice what is going on knows that what he does is morally indefensible.
See, that's what I thought you might be referring
Yeah.
to, but I liked the use of the word sociopath, and I was like, wow, maybe she has a quote. Maybe she has a quote that has the word sociopath in it, and I'm not aware of it.
Nope. Sorry, that was
Um,
but
that was your
that
addition,
was my addition.
and that is from the book "The Journalist and the Murderer,"
Right.
which I highly recommend,
Hmm.
and is very much about the things that I'm talking about. I'm going to say the last thing in
Hmm.
this segment, which has gone on for a while, and I appreciate your patience, Dan,
Hmm.
is that I got so angry at you this morning,
Yes.
like, and all my
I
texts,
couldn't tell from
my
all the texts, Anna. No, sorry. Go.
my flurry of text
Yeah.
messages betrayed that. And this is a wild kind of like segue, but I actually was in the parking lot of my church when I was texting you.
Oh.
My new church I've
Oh.
been going to, which is a Christian contemplative church, and it borrows a lot from Quaker
Hmm.
services. There's a lot of silence, and
Oh, nice.
it the service today, and it's also currently people are rotating through worship leaders. Like,
Hmm.
it's not even, they don't even have a pastor. That's how hippy dippy it is. um and the person who led the service today was talking about those things that get us in the way of our contemplative nature, that get in the way of what they refer to sometimes as the resurrected life, which is not literally the
I get.
resurrection,
Yeah.
but enlightenment.
Yeah.
And but although that you don't just reach it like in this practice, like you have to keep doing it.
Hmm.
Like, you don't, it's not like, oh, I'm saved, woohoo. It's more, you know
Yeah.
but she was talking about them as like, what, and as a person in recovery, and she talked about them as stones we roll away, you know
Hmm.
to exit the place where, ego death. And in AA, sometimes we refer to there's a pretty great book about character defects called Drop the Rock,
Hmm.
that we carry around our character defects like stones.
Hmm.
And they're precious to us sometimes. And I was thinking, as she was talking about that, about how righteous anger is a real character defect of mine. And You wouldn't know anything about that, Dan. I know that's not something you've ever noticed about me.
This is coming from out of the blue, Anna. Sorry.
But I apologize. I mean, I feel like I didn't really totally like lay into you or anything, but I do recognize that this is in some ways the message of this movie, right?
Mhm.
Is to be cautious about righteous anger,
Yes.
and it is a conundrum
Mhm.
because if you think about the Civil War, and I know I texted this to you, like I know that the Union Army committed war crimes. I'm still glad they won.
Right. Yeah.
Uh, I don't know. That's just where I will say that it is a difficult character defect to let go of and still believe that there are moral choices that have a right choice and a wrong choice. But I also recognize that you saying the movie apolitical is not an immoral thing.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Anna. Thank you very
But
much.
anyway, Dan, I prayed about this morning.
Wow.
So
This
I
film,
did.
yeah.
I mean, I felt like, you know, I want to have this conversation with Dan, not under the pressure of this particular character defect of mine, and to recognize like to be more curious than righteous,
Mhm.
which is the what I always when I
Which is what we should aspire to.
yeah, and you can it's sort of
Mostly.
funny. You can still be on the right side of things and have that not have that righteousness propel you.
Yeah, I would hope.
Is that
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. That totally makes sense.
okay?
And to be
Anyway,
clear,
I hope I did a good job with that, Dan.
no, look at it this way. The thing I will say is that I like this film. You loved it, but what I will say
Mhm.
about this film is that I woke up this morning thinking about it, and there are not a lot of films where like the carryover from the day before
Yeah.
to waking up is all that. Like I do hope a lot of people see this film because it is sufficiently interesting and provocative that will, even if people will miss certain things about it, and I think they are going to. I think, as you said, the reviews have missed certain things about it. It is
There are what I'll say the specific thing is the reviews I've read that don't mention the part about people of
right.
color. Like
Mhm.
I just think that's so fucking clear. Like in this, you know, there's the you mentioned they pass through this town where it seems like nothing has changed.
Mhm.
It is the black
Right.
character that
Who points
notices the
that out?
snipers on the roof.
Yeah.
And also when he says when Kirsten Dunst, you know, as Lee says, this reminds me of everything that I'd forgotten.
Mhm.
He says this reminds me of everything I remember.
Yeah. That was a great exchange. That was a
That I think is the tipping the hand.
yeah, yeah.
Like the what sides on
Put it
what
this way, you're
here.
right. This
I think to the extent there is a we keep on both
Mhm.
siderism, you know, pox on both houses kind of thing. I think one of the things he said that I think he said something that what the message he really wants people to get out of it is like being appalled or abhorrent or whatever. And I think one thing he might be trying to do, and I hope he's trying to do, and this is what Jamel Bowie kind of talked about in his writing about it,
Mhm.
is we cannot don't wish for this.
Yeah.
You know, don't think that this is like something that is deserved or
Or will
that
lead to
there
a better
is
outcome.
yeah.
That's the I mean,
Yeah.
it's probably yeah, I mean, there's no scenario where this is gonna be worth it, most of the time. I think
Right, and I
yeah,
think it is the right it's right now the conservatives who are talking the most about this, but I think there is probably on the left a certain strain of thought that's like, "Yeah, bring it on."
yeah, I
You
agree.
know?
The other thing is that I think part of the issue is that what makes it hard I think that is his message, but one of the reasons it's a difficult message to occasionally draw out from it is precisely the matter-of-fact way the journalists handle this. And so, again, for me, that was profoundly disturbing. And I hope that is profoundly disturbing for everyone who watches it. But I do worry
Yeah.
that some will not be disturbed by it. And so that's the,
I think
yeah.
that they'll see that as being like, "Well, that's how journalists should behave," kind of
Mm,
thing, you know?
maybe.
And I also wonder if there's some part of some of the criticism where they want them they might see the same things I saw in terms of like, you know, that their one side is shooting journalists and the other isn't, and one side has people of color and the other doesn't. They might see that, and but then also see the atrocities committed by the good
Yeah.
guys, and like feel like, well, that's not nice. Like that's bad. You
Yes.
shouldn't have the good guys doing bad
Yep.
things. And I think what you and I are saying, and what I think it's just true, is that like good guys do shitty stuff,
Mhm.
man. Like you can be the good guys and still commit
Yeah.
atrocities.
You can do the right thing for the wrong reasons. Um,
Woo, woo, woo. That was an air siren.
it's time for Discordant Notes. This is where we take questions from the Discord and answer them in the podcast. Interestingly, there's been a very vigorous discussion on the Discord about this film, but very few questions. One of them, however, does come from Jim Rubel, which is scarier Alex Garland character, Jesse Plemons in this film, or the bear hybrid in Annihilation? And my answer is I vote for Jesse, but it's damn close because that bear was unsettling. I remember, I don't remember much about that film, but I remember the first time that bear makes a noise and it was just like, oh God, so yeah.
The fully human character is always more unsettling, right?
That's the
Like the monster that is human.
Yeah.
Again, like, I saw someone call it stunt casting because he's like, not only does this war, tear us apart, it tears apart a marriage.
You know what? I saw an interview with that Kirsten Dunst did with Seth Meyers, and she made this point, and I think it's a good one. It was perfect to cast Jesse Plemons in that role. He is originally another actor was cast in that role, but during rehearsals it didn't work out. They're filming in Atlanta, and basically Plemons was there with their children, just to be with the family.
Oh wow!
And it was Dunst who suggested maybe go with Plemons. But the great thing about using Plemons for that is that it is a truly repellent character. But Plemons has built up enough goodwill among America's audience that he can pull it off in a way that like a newer actor, if they tried that, would get typecast for the entire rest of their lives.
Well, the best friend from Friday Night Lights, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and he's just so good. It is, and you mentioned this, but that whole second act is superb in part because you do get this like implied criticism, I think, of the journalists as being adrenaline junkies, right? And it's just so perfect, right?
Yeah. That's what happens right after that. Yes. Yeah. No, I agree. Because like it was like, really, they're doing that, and then like, okay, come up and yep. I mean, I didn't want that, but like, yeah.
Oh, all right.
Wait.
Shrapnel. Yep. Debris field, Dan. Is there anything that we have not discussed?
I'm looking at the debris field and like, almost there's a few small things I have. What about you? Do you have anything or?
I don't know if there is literally. Oh, I remember what this is like a footnote thing that I just want to be snotty and mention, which is that this movie, I already name dropped Sontag, so I'm going to name drop John Berger as Ways of Seeing as well. And the reason why I use cultural mystification at the top is that's me getting angry at the people who are interpreting this movie wrongly or interpreting this movie in a way it's not kind of radical. Because one of the paintings that he talks about is a painting of the men that run the almshouse, the regents of the almshouse, by Franz Hals. I looked that up, and he uses that picture because it's Hals was at that time himself like living in the almshouse and penniless, and he's drafted to paint the picture of the people running it. And it is, if you look at it without knowing very much about it, I think we would agree that it is not a flattering portrait. And it's been called like it's an early critique of capitalism, like the men running this almshouse are titans of industry for their time. But that there's another interpretation that's been like, no, he's just accurate. That's just an accurate portrait. And Berger calls that cultural mystification because it's sort of it's a gatekeeping people from an interpretation that is perhaps more radical or enlightening or will do more to serve the viewer than, no, it's just some people looked like that back then. You can say it's intentionally unflattering, or you can say that's just what people looked like. So that is my debris field.
Wow. Okay, that was really heavy debris.
It's working in the John Berger.
Yeah. Okay. My debris is much lighter, just to be clear. I really only have 2 points left that I want to make. The first is that I love the first line of this film, which you hear, the president say, "We are closer now than we ever have been." And obviously that has a double meaning given that we're watching this in 2024. So that I think it's the one time Garland actually like hit something on the nose. The last thing, this is a really small thing, and I'm legit fascinated by this. I did want to know more about exactly how the country broke up, but there's the moment where the Secret Service agent is in the press room and like is trying to negotiate the terms of surrender and suggests the president wants to go to a neutral site, either Greenland or Alaska. And I was like, what's going on with Alaska? Like I was just honestly curious at that point about what was going on. But and it was just like it was an odd little moment. That whole exchange, by the way, between the soldiers and her was actually funny. Like, and it's scary funny, and it ends obviously horribly, but like it was the inflections in the soldier saying, sure, we can talk, absolutely, you know, like it was actually kind of funny.
And I will point out that that is the one person of color you see on the
Loyalist
loyalist
side,
side. And someone else pointed out, don't get mad, don't cancel me, but that she might bear a certain resemblance or a resemblance to a certain commentator who was recently fired by the Daily Wire.
Oh, oh, I don't know about that one. Oh wait, I'm sorry. Two other quick things. Just sorry. First, I did like.
And also,
Yeah,
just to continue
yeah,
that point, that there might have been strategic reasons why they would present a person of color to negotiate
sure.
with the
That
Western
would make total
forces.
sense.
Yeah.
Two last things. First, I did like the idea of foreign reporters as embeds for the U.S. Civil War. That totally made sense, and it was just like interesting. And then finally, I'm just going to close with this point. I did watch this film with some friends, many of whom, all of whom, correctly inferred that Offerman was, you know, a stand-in for Trump. And so the take of one of them was, you know, it's a really happy ending.
It yes, right?
Yeah,
And
just to
also the photos are very Abu
yes,
Ghraib.
that is what I said exactly right after that film. So yeah, yeah,
But I also believe that that is a way of saying this is what righteousness can
yeah,
do if embraced without without also equal measures of sorrow.
right. I agree.
Right.
Yeah. All right, I think
Well,
we've done
Dan,
it.
that was good.
Yeah.
That was a good. I did not get angry. That's it's an Alex Garland film, and I did not blow my top.
Excellent.
So I'm gonna say that is spiritual progress for Anna.
Mm-hmm. You were good when we did Ex Machina. I mean, you know, it was only 28 days later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is true.
Yeah.
It was really only 20 days
Yeah.
later. I think yeah, I mean, I may actually watch Men. Did you watch Devs yet?
No, I haven't seen Devs, and I haven't seen Men. My only experience with Men was watching the trailer in a movie theater, and people laughed at the trailer, and not in the intentional way.
It's supposedly not. It's one of his lesser films.
Yeah.
I also just gonna extend our long running time just a little more by saying, so Dan, have you seen Three Body Problem yet? The whole thing.
I am working my way through it. Actually, I confess Fallout is occupying my time more at this point. But I will work on Three Body Problem, I promise.
I'm just, if we do kind of a special episode wrap up stuff, I don't have enough people to complain about Three Body Problem too.
Okay, I will get to it. I will get on it. I understand.
So you might do that, and I also believe that I will start watching Fallout soon. So
excellent.
We are as done as we possibly can be for two people who think we might also see this movie again. Please become a patron. Dan, where can people find more of your stuff? Should this not be enough? Should this just whet their appetite?
Yes, I have a Substack called Dresner's World. I am on Blue Sky. I'm at Dan Dresner. That's pretty much it at this point. I've got some other stuff coming out, but I don't know if it'll be out by the time this comes out.
I think by the time this comes out, you will have just a few days to register for my writing workshop, which is called the Third Story Workshop. You can go to my website, which is Dan.
www.annamariecox.com. Spelled the same, pronounced differently.
And if you go to annamariecox.com/workshop or /third story, it's hard to say /third story.
It is hard.
You will get more specific information about the workshop. Please keep me from having to do a newsletter and sign up for the workshop.
Yes.
You know, another reason why newsletters won't save journalism is no one's going to go out to fucking cover a war for a newsletter.
That is correct.
All right. Until next time.
Keep this channel open for more.
I guess I did get to my point, which is like, yeah, I did. All right.